So good to be here. So I want to thank you. And on behalf of my father, the Griots Blues. Griot, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is like a West African praise singer or a historian, someone in the oral tradition or the artistic tradition who really keeps the history of a people and makes sure that it stays vibrant and really sort of taking what is in the past and infusing it into the young generation so that they can carry it into the future. And my dad always considered himself to be a modern day griot. And his life was not an easy one, particularly in the younger days and all that. So I want to talk about his sort of blues, but how he continued to move forward, inspiring so many folks. And I think bringing so much beauty into the world. So thank you for coming out, and I want to share this conversation with you. Let's see if I can figure out how this works. Oh, that way. There we are. So one of the ways I wanted to go about this, because I was really having a hard time. I do a good bit of public speaking, and almost every time I speak, I quote my father. I quote him all the time. But now to do a talk about him, I was sort of stuck. Like, where do I start? What do I do? How do I cram all these years into an hour? What's it? And it came to me last week that I was just going to maybe try to utilize some of the phrases, the adages, the lessons that he gave us, and sort of use those as guideposts to take us a little bit through some of the adventures of his life. So one of the main things he would say to us is that in the effort lies the art. And he would go further and he would make sure to say that, you know, it's not everyone that's going to have paintings hanging in the museums like he did. Or every singer is going to have 1 million downloads or this, that, or the other. But he says that doesn't matter. What matters is that if you pick up a pen, you pick up a pencil, you're doing something that is creative, you are an artist. You are making that effort. You are pushing it forward, and it matters. He would say as well that if you're a singer, and again, if you don't have all those downloads or whatever, maybe if the song you sing only makes one other person smile, even if that person is you, you are making a significant contribution to the musical canon. This matters. In the effort lies the art, and this is definitely something that has been instilled in us. And so again, as I was mentioning before, I really want to take this, that he's really dedicated to learning from the past and using it to move forward. And a couple of things I just want to show, excuse me, I'm going the wrong direction. So, where did my dad come from? He was born in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and to a pretty remarkable family. Thank you very much for what you said about the Smith family. We appreciate that, but we certainly didn't invent this. This goes way back. So the painting to the left here is a small store, a candy kitchen. It was just down the road from where they lived, and this was the very first painting that my dad did. So this painting is from the early 1930s. Now the scene to the right with with all the fireworks and the horse and this and that, this is a rendition of the Maryland Home for Friendless Colored Children. So when you were talking a little bit about my career and some of the things, and I'll talk about my siblings more, it also goes way back in our family to try to give for those who are marginalized, those who are maybe disadvantaged. So this home, this was during the Depression era, and my grandfather, Hawthorne Smith, who's standing in the door, you see his silhouette, he was the principal of the school. Our grandmother, Ms. Hattie B. Smith, was the primary teacher and took care of everything. She was the force behind everything. And so my dad and his siblings grew up with always 12 to 15 other children from the community who were orphans or waifs, as they used to call them back in the day. So this comes from a really sort of deep place of giving, of sharing, and celebrating. So, as I mentioned, my dad said it doesn't matter the popularity or whatever that you do, but one of the things he told me, particularly right before I started having children, is he said, if you see a child and they have a crayon in their hand, or they're doing something like that, never take the crayon out of their hand. Let them create. let them express, let them keep moving forward. And as you can see, this brilliant young woman writing with the left hand there, who will eventually be a Hall of Famer and all that. We're going to talk about her a little bit more later. But he just captured this moment and saw how beautiful and how important it was. And then her ragamuffin siblings who are over here, and Dad just called this the art lesson. And this is the photograph, but you notice that little cherubic dude up front, you might recognize it. But that's my brothers Bill and Bart and my dad just looking over. But again, never take the writing utensil away from someone. Never dissuade someone from being creative, because really, again, in the effort lies the art. Another phrase of my father's, and this is something I think that's at the personal level, but it's also the societal level. And particularly coming from a family, a Black American family growing up in this country, he said that oftentimes our history is defined by responding to adversity with beauty. Whether it's from the antebellum days, whether it was things being really hard, as I mentioned, creating the blues, wanting to pray and knowing that, and creating gospel. When there was the whole move to the urban north, jazz and bebop and all those different things, when they took the instruments away from the schools and there was nothing left but 2 turntables and a microphone, hip hop was born. But it's always these sort of things of responding to adversity with beauty. And this particular painting, which is also on the table over there, our good friend Sophia Agbaje lent it to us for tonight, is of a family running, seeking their freedom while being pursued. And it's kind of a metaphor. But for my father as well, it wasn't easy. He came from that nice family I was talking about, but when he was 6 years old, he was sitting next to his dad driving in a Model A Ford. Something happened with the clutch, and the stick shift came back and wounded my dad's leg. He went to Johns Hopkins University Hospital, which at that point, and still is one of the most highly renowned hospitals in the world. They set his leg, they put him in a cast, but they told him that he had to stay in the cast for 9 months. And after a few months, even though he was in pain and all this, and my grandmother would go and argue and fight, they're like, the doctor knows best, the doctor knows best. By the time they took the cast off of my father, his leg had atrophied. From the age of 6, he was never able to run again. So this is one of those things where there was a rage, there was an anger at this, but he really struggled to kind of find a way to sublimate it. One of those famous, one of those fancy psychobabble words we throw around, but to really take this, and again, to take that adversity and to try to turn it into beauty. And this is something he was very successful at doing. So for example, this is a painting from Baltimore, Maryland, back in the 1940s, just looking at this snowy scene with the funeral procession and all that, but seeing the beauty in it. And actually, this is a painting that he did back in the 1940s, 50s, sold it. We hadn't seen it for a long time. Back in the 1980s, he just said, I missed that painting. And he sat down that night and did it from memory.
Oh my goodness.
So this was the second, it was really deep. It was deep inside of him. But again, it just sort of speaks to that notion of looking at what's around us, even when it's painful, but finding the beauty therein. And again, even in terms of the hard realities of this country, particularly a century ago, when he was first coming up, to the right, that's a portrait of Billie Holiday. And many of you might know her famous tune, Strange Fruit, talking about the lynchings and everything. These were things that unfortunately my dad and his siblings were aware of and had actually seen that growing up. This is another piece he calls Night Shift, and a similar sort of motif, but you can tell that this sort of thing stayed with him. Okay, that there was a lot of pain in terms of some of what he was seeing, but he never really sort of moved back against that. He continued to dream, and he went to high school at Douglas High School in Baltimore. And as many of you who are creatively minded know, sometimes if the teachers aren't really hitting you like this, your mind will drift, right? So my dad's mind was drifting, and he took out a penknife and he started carving in his desk. And he was carving a map of the city of Baltimore. And by the time the teacher saw what was going on and ran over to castigate him, this map was about halfway done. And the teacher was really mad, but really impressed. So, so I took him to the principal's office, and the principal said, first things first, you're gonna refurbish the desk, get it back to how it was. But we also have these 6 walls that don't have anything on them. Would you be interested in doing a mural? A series of murals, and he did, and they showed in the hallways of Douglas High School from the late 1930s until the mid 1970s. They were taken down when they refurbished, and then in the 1980s, Mayor Schmoke of Baltimore tried to get them put up again in a museum, but unfortunately, political red tape, this, that, and the other, they didn't go back up again. But for 40 years, people coming into this high school saw, again, this response of a bored kid in 10th grade geometry class who did those things. So one of the ways my dad, I think, really tried to make sense of some of the pain in life and how to go forward is he always had a great belief in heroes and sheroes. And to the left here, this, one of the things he did, he was working with the Philadelphia Inquirer after papers in Baltimore coming up and doing illustrations. And so this is one he did, for one of the Sunday, back when we had Sunday papers and those wonderful comic sections and all that. This is one he did way back in the day with John Henry. And again, that's my dad. He posed that, himself for that. So he was, who knows what would have happened if his leg hadn't been hurt. He might have been the heavyweight champ. He couldn't do that, but he brought it into this. So Paul Bunyan and, Casey at Bat, and the folks going off to war, and even doing some of the periodicals, like there's sort of those noir movies and also the Pulp Fiction sort of things. He would do those sort of illustrations when good would conquer evil. And all those sort of things, he really, truly believed, I think, in the spirit. And it is one of the ways, again, that he would respond to adversity with beauty. And he came up at the time of World War II. And with his leg having been injured, he was not able to serve in uniform. But he had a very vibrant correspondence with this gentleman's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, trying to figure out a way to get into the service. And she wrote back to him a number of times. They couldn't quite do that, but they were able to get my dad a job working at the shipyards. And this is the shipyard in Chester, and he would do the art and like these sort of monthly things. So any way to participate, so again, with a lot of that pain that was there, he never turned against America. And, and to the far right is a lithograph that he did, I think his first lithograph, and he called it Night Train, and it's cropped a little bit here, but that was Hitler in the back and Tojo, and they're sort of shoveling human beings into a furnace and the railroad is called the Blitzkrieg Express. You can't see all of that. But anything he could do to raise awareness, to raise funds, what have you, he always wanted to participate because he really did believe in heroes and he believed in the promise of this country. So my dad loved cars. For those of you who know us, and remember on Maple Avenue, my dad was usually the first one with some sort of fancy car. People were like, what is that? I remember when he came in with the BMW, I was only like 4, so it was like 1969. People were like, BMW, what is this boxy little thing going on? And he would go out and just like, Porsche, you're sitting on the porch? No, that's a Porsche. Oh, he was doing those things. He loved cars. I would love going to old movies with him because no matter what car was going, oh, that's a Studebaker, that's a 39, that's a this. He just knew it all. So he loved the technical things. But as we get into next, the technical things, as marvelous as they are, paled in comparison to him to what is human, to what connects us, to what is really vibrant. He was a romantic at heart, a romantic and a realist. Calls this picture over to the far right, the source, almost like an Eve-like figure at the beginning of time. And this is another lithograph that he had done. And so there was, it just found so much in terms of human expression. And I love these pieces. I mean, you can capture it in motion and movement, but I look at the woman to the right over there and it's her eyes. I just want to know, she is in such a deep thought about, is it longing, is it melancholy? Is she figured like, and I think that he was really, really amazing at doing this. So I wanted to share, not only is he a visual artist, but he was a poet. He published a number of books, but here's one I wanted to share with you. It's called The Miracle. And so imagine growing up in the household with this person, and definitely impacted how I view things and what he feels is important. So if I may, with The Miracle. On the star-crossed planet Earth lived two all-powerful monarchs, the King of the Sun and the Prince of the Quarter Moon. Long ago, at the very start of things, before the King of the Sun was born, the Prince of the Quarter Moon was sovereign and master of the world. The powers of the Moon Prince were legendary. He could cause whole oceans to dance merely by touching them with a moonbeam. Visualize turquoise waves, sequined in starlight, performing an ecstatic ballet, choreographed by the Prince of the Quarter Moon. But sometime during the Earth's long Stygian night, a voice like thunder was heard, and the shades of night shuddered and parted, and at that moment the King of the Sun appeared. And so it came to pass that the Prince of the Quarter Moon and the King of the Sun came to rule together, each giving over his kingdom to the other for half of each day. Thus they found an accommodation and lived in peace. Now, into the court of the Sun King and the Prince of the Quarter Moon came a poet named Dawn and a magician called Twilight. Such was the charm of the wanderers that the two monarchs found themselves competing for the fealty of the poet named Dawn and the magician called Twilight. Thus the two monarchs grew apart, and joy flew the kingdom. Until one day, Dawn the poet said to the King of the Sun and the Prince of the Quarter Moon, "We love you both equally, but since you force us to choose between you, we will swear devotion to him who produces the greatest miracle." And so it came to pass that the King of the Sun and the Prince of the Quarter Moon met in contest to compete for the fealty of the poet called Dawn and the magician called Twilight. First came forth the mighty Sun King, fashioning out of thin air a shimmering tiara of gold and silver, studded with diamonds and jade, pearls and emeralds green. Now strode forth the Moon Prince, and touching the emeralds and jade, turned them into the fairest of human eyes, cool, level, and constant as a panther's, brightly burning. The King of the Sun then created a wondrous sound. A sound like the wind from hidden caves, a sound like the rush of waves against rocks, the music of constellations, exalted, hanging suspended somewhere beneath the stars on the night air. Then the prince came forward and changed all the haunting sounds into the voice of a woman, with all of life's tender words for a vocabulary, with sighs for punctuation, orchestrated for love. Now the king returned, with a bouquet brilliant with hyacinths and violets, a crystal vial of perfumes from the east, and a fragile alabaster shell with a captured rainbow dancing inside, amber honeycombs, and crisp ears of corn burning red and gold, snowflakes spinning in slow motion through the frozen branches of crystal trees. The King of the Sun then placed his miracle before the poet called Dawn and the magician called Twilight. Then the king retired. The Moon Prince came forward and smiled at the king. And at that moment, the king knew he had lost. Because as he watched, the hyacinths and the perfumes, the honeycombs, the panther eyes, and the wind song all slowly evolved into that ultimate miracle. One small, perfect love. And so it came to pass, the Prince of the Quarter Moon having produced the greatest miracle, was thereafter attended early and late by the poet called Dawn and the magician called Twilight, and became once again sovereign and master of the world. So imagine he published this when I was 6 years old. Imagine being a little kid growing up in that household. And with that sort of thing, like, yeah, there's so many wondrous things out there, but there's nothing more wondrous than the human connection and who we are to one another. So I wanted to share that with you as well. More of the human connection and expression and all they call this quitting time. I always wondered, did she get stood up? Is it late? And then he'll talk more music later. And then just this little jam session, he did this in like an hour. And she's like, I want to hear that music so badly. That band is having such a good time. Homeboy's like up out of his chair and they're playing, he's blowing his horn. It's like, Dad just, he just caught it like that. So as a romantic and someone who sought love and was trying to make things better out of suffering and all that, life bequeathed it and sent an angel his way. This is our mother. This is Bernice Anastasia Smith. This is circa 1951. And yeah, Mom was literally a rocket scientist and a beauty queen.
Wow.
She worked with GE on the fuel cells that helped fuel John Glenn's rockets, so a contemporary of the folks in Hidden Figures. But she also was Miss Sepia, Philadelphia. She had a tryout with the Duke Ellington Orchestra in 1942. They wanted her as a singer. They said, oh, you just have to, learn a little bit more. Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn, their book is about that thick of the songs. She had just arrived in the country from Jamaica and went out to the nightclub, sang for them. They loved it. They said, okay, you can start with a satellite orchestra. But her younger brother, who grew up here, went to our grandmother's like, my sister's fine, right? And she's gonna be out on the road with these musicians, and they're not all Duke Ellington and this and that. She needs to stay home and go to school. So we have the picture of her with Duke and all that, but she stayed home, but she was his muse. They were married for 58 years.
Wow.
And Mom in the 40s, Mom in the 80s. Lithograph. Mom going to church. Some of you might know her from Our Lady of Grace Church in Pendle, or singing in the choir. There's the Wallach family used to live behind us. There's Lorraine Wallach, had this beautiful soprano. Mom had this beautiful soprano, and just the two of them. I don't know what the rest of the choir was doing, but I would just go to church and hear the two of them. But so again, if I can just dip into my father's words a little bit. This poem is dedicated to Mom, and it's called Gifts. Had I known her when she was 5, I would have given her a puppy with soft, luminous eyes and a nose as cold and wet as a snowball. When she was 16, I would have strung her a rainbow of seed pearls and emeralds and thrown in a tiara of stars for good measure. Now at last, she is mine to lavish gifts upon, and I have not come empty-handed. I'll give her the bluebird I found this morning, with its wings caught in a sunbeam. I'll give her my window pane, trembling with raindrops, each sparkling drop a perfect landscape by Broywood. I'll give her my sack of marbles, aggies, shooters, and steelies, the jewels of my youth. I'll give her my arm to wear across her shoulders, a garment for all seasons. Take my gifts to her now, and if she asks, what's the occasion? Tell her. Just tell her, because it's Thursday. They set quite a standard. My wife and I will be celebrating our 28th anniversary in August. And with folks like this to look towards, and the fact that he also captured all of this in so many different ways across so much time in his work. But Dad couldn't really sustain the entire family just as an artist. A lot of artists die broke and all that. And he worked in advertising. He did a lot of different things, and very much like my mom, kind of breaking barriers. He was a successful advertising executive back in the 50s, 60s, at a time where not many black men were doing it. And he had his own company. He was like a one-man show. He could write, he could draw, he could do everything. But one of the things I think that frustrated him, and one of the things he taught me about, and I think it's a Sammy Davis quote, but I'm not sure. But he said, sometimes being a black man in America means that you have to prove what you're not before you can show what you are. You have to prove that you're not a thug or, someone who's out and a ne'er-do-well before you can show that you're actually a nice guy. You have to show that you're not uneducated or miseducated or what have you before you can show that actually you're an intelligent person, you're an intellectual or something like that. Sometimes it's almost like the guilty until proven innocent sort of thing. And this could weigh on him. But he continued, as always, moving forth. But again, it's the eyes, sometimes with the eyes.
Yeah.
And this is just one where I can feel him trying to make sense of things. Let's see what else I just wanted to say here. When he went to art school, he went to the Philadelphia Academy of Art on a full scholarship, and he had a patron in Baltimore help pay his way. This is the school she had gone to, and he went there, and after the first day drawing nude models, the live models, he was called to the side, and the professors told him that he would no longer be able to draw in the class with the other students, but they would make sure that a model was available if he wanted to come back at like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or something. Well, my dad was like, if I'm not good enough to be in the room and work with my fellow students, I don't want to be here. So he eventually transferred out and went to the Philadelphia Museum School of Art, known most famously for being the spot where Rocky runs up the steps in the movie, but had a wonderful career there. But it was things like this that kind of troubled him. When we first moved to Langhorne a year before I was born, there was a little controversy. We were the first black family to ever live on Maple Avenue. This building from 1680. I mean, this town predates the country. There are folk. We were the first blacks on that street. There are a lot of black families on Green Street and Richardson Avenue. My friends from Green Street used to remind me, yeah, brother, but that's a long block. And he would talk about going through the airports and people trying to place him, and they would always come, here's someone who hasn't run since he was 6. Hey, are you Willie Mays? Are you Hank Aaron? Are you this? Like, how are you here? My dad used to call it the Willie Mays syndrome. But dealing with the advertising world. But one of the things I think he felt that he had to carry with him, this is something he taught my eldest brother, Bill, and he kind of explained it to me at one point. He said that, Hawk, if you walk into a room full of 12 strangers and you don't immediately change that room just by your presence, you might as well turn around and walk back out because you failed. And I've seen my dad do this. I've seen my brothers do this. I see my sister do this. So I was like, I can do this. And I thought it was like a little badge of pride. Like, I can just walk into a room with 12 people and change it. Like, whatever. And I remember when I went to college and I was talking to a young woman that I hoped to date, and I somehow brought this up in the conversation, we Smiths. And I told her that if I walk into a room with 12 people, I don't change it, I should walk back out. She cried. And it was not the reaction I was expecting. And I was like, why are you crying? What's that? And she goes, I can't imagine what it would be like to live under that pressure. What if there just happens to be a day where you just feel like another guy? And you just want to walk in there or do that, but to not be exceptional is a failure is really, really heavy. And I thank goodness that she told me that at a young age where I could begin to alter how I was looking at things, because my eldest brother and I, we would talk about this later on in his life, and he struggled with a lot of things. Different addictions and, decisions and this and that. And one of the things he told me is like, Hawk, I was so conscious of trying to be the man that I forgot about being a man. It's a delicate and difficult balance. And I think that it's one that my dad also struggled with. And so another poem of his, and he allowed my band to record it. I play with a band up in New York called Casa Mantequilla. We play all the time. I meant to bring CDs with me or whatever today just for folks, but right towards the end of his time with us, he did some artwork I'll show you later for the band, but he also allowed us to use his poetry for a couple of songs. I always wanted to hear his songs in a blues. And so there's one he wrote for one of his uncles, but I called it Wounded Healer. And if you bear with me, I'll just do a verse. At night, I walk the wet cobbles and drink from a little flask, holding the city down, careful not to slip and fall and let the city rear up and the buildings topple, and the night be filled with screams of children lost as me. At night I walk the wet cobbles and drink from my little flask, holding the city down. You feel that pressure because if you slip and fall, the buildings rear up, the buildings on topple, and the night be filled with screams of children, lost as me. I don't know if you hear all that in those eyes, but when I look, I do. But he still believed in heroes, and he never became pessimistic. So this is one of the first images in the beautiful black coloring book he did for school students during the civil rights era and all that. And of course, it's Muhammad Ali with the floating like the butterfly, stinging with the bee. Yes, indeed. Dr. King, who is featured in many of his pieces, and he called this one High Noon in America. Hard to believe that was 60 years ago. And we still fighting some of the same terrain, right? But, and I know there are pictures. This is here in Bristol. And one of my dad's frustrations is that he wasn't physically able to do the work for this statue, but he helped to design it. The wonderful artist whose name I'm going to forget, unfortunately.
James Gaffney.
James Gaffney. Deal right, everybody. Thank you. So that's right at Bristol, pointing north. That's Harriet Tubman showing people the way home. Mm-hmm. And this one he called Mount Lar. And sort of like the Mount Rushmore thing, and with Dr. King, Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali. But underneath, and it's tough with this photograph, but he brings it again and sort of ties us to our ancestors, the majesty of Africa through the lion, through the baobab tree in the back. But what doesn't come off is there's sort of a ghostly procession of slaves being driven across there. But then out of those roots, that suffering, again, hear these great heroes who have come from that, again, responding to adversity with beauty. He stayed true to that throughout his entire career, through his life. And again, Dr. King, yet again, in his very pensive sort of mood as things are going on, as things are piling up, but yet again, in a very peaceful way of sort of pushing forward. Again, the eyes. And this is towards the end of his life, right after my mom had passed. And he did another self-portrait, and again, the stories are there. The stories are there. So family. My dad used to tell me that to be a good parent, you owe your children two things. an anchor and wings. And he said that anchor was really about a solid foundation, that your children would feel cared for, held, supported, safe. We owe that to our children, but at the same time, we owe them wings, and that is the capacity to dream. That is the capacity to try, to experiment, and to fail. Knowing that even if they fail, they still have that anchor to come home to, that they can dust themselves off and pick up again and move forward. And some of the folks in here, I just want to recognize, again, this young woman sitting right here. As a teen at Neshaminy High School. To the far side, that's my big brother Bart. Played on some of the best football teams the state of Pennsylvania has ever seen. Living in Jamaica right now. And again, in terms of like the wings, for my brother, you know, he went on, he did his studies, but for the last 40 years, he's been on the road, trying to engage in business. He's lived in Brazil, he's lived in Zimbabwe, he's lived in Jamaica. The world was a larger place. But my dad and my mom always made him feel that it was his place and he could go out and try things. These folks in the middle, that's my better 2/3 there. That's Dr. Yinka Akishule Smith, my bride of almost 28 years, and that little dude in her arms just turned 21 this last weekend. Wow. Yeah, I feel that when it makes my knees hurt just thinking about it. But the anchor was there. And as part of the anchor, I just have to recognize this town of Langhorne, and I have traveled a lot. There are a lot of miles on the odometer at this point. But the friends we have here and the people we've known through our school and through the neighborhood, just throughout our entire lives, you were part of that anchor. You're part of that solid foundation. I'm always proud when I tell people, oh, you're from Philly? I was like, I was born in Philly, but I grew up in Langhorne. Because I honestly cannot think of a better place to have grown up. People here in Langhorne, they want to know what you can do. They don't want to know where you're from. They want to know who you know. Show me, what can you do? And this is one called Duke. And this is, actually it's not the best photograph anyway, but this is a great shot, just like a family gathering. And he said, and he calls it a do, because there's an old thing like, oh, we're having a do tonight, we're having a this, like there's another word for a party. But he also said it's an active thing. Family is not something you have, family is something you do. You act on it, you serve, you share, you play, you love. The couple back there by the tree that seemed a little out of proportion, that's all purposeful. That's his mom and dad. And they had this picture taken at our place on Maple Avenue, a couple blocks there, by a photographer, and dad sort of transposed that into this piece. But this is all about family. And you know, when we talk about wings and allowing people, you know, and helping people to move forward, I'm going to embarrass my sister for a moment here because I just want to use her as an example. Claire went to Penn State and did a couple years there, and you know, what have you, but it just didn't feel like it was the right fit. And what she was studying, it wasn't the right thing. And I remember she came home, I think we were working at Bamberger's. I used to go back when the Oxford Valley Mall was new. But legend has it, at one point she sat down with Dad, and you know, they were sort of talking about where she was in life, and Dad was like, what is it that you really want to do? What moves you? What's your passion? And Claire was like, I love sports. I love particularly baseball. I love writing. And I want to be involved in that. That's what I want to do. And Dad's essential message was like, what are we waiting for? And obviously, and Claire went to Temple University. Soon thereafter, the Bucks County Courier-Times and the Bulletin and all the rest. If you did the QR code, you know all this. And now she sits at the top of her profession doing something that she loves because she had those wings. She had that anchor and she had those wings. And you look at some of these paintings that are up there, and again, sports as Again, you know, this responding to adversity with beauty. You got the picture of Don Baylor over here, one of Claire's great friends. And his nickname was the Judge, so, you know, Dad had to get a little funny, you know. Steve Garvey, another one of Claire's great friends. A couple of the Negro Brothers, again, you know, a lithograph that he did for them on the occasion of them winning more games than any other pair of brothers in the history of the sport. But there was also a thing for boxing too. I think my dad would have been a boxer if his leg hadn't been hurt. And up there he got to throw in Manila with Ali and Frazier and other people just working out at the gym. His dreams, still working them out, still responding. And then for all the young folks in her family and all that, Claire might recognize those legs. Those are her son Josh's legs. They're just looking at all of our boys who are going to make the NBA and the NFL and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's the dream, right? It's those wings. And then this guy. I got to pose for a number of my dad's pieces over the years, and you know, I can honestly, I've never been a model, but I can say, well, actually, I posed for paintings that have been in the museums. Like, yeah, I don't. Anyway, that's an aside. But one of the things Dad talked to me about was the inevitability of gradualness, and I remember, particularly when I came back from Senegal. I studied in Senegal for a year, in junior year of college, French-speaking West African country, and it just blew my mind. It was like a renaissance for me. I just realized that I belonged to something much larger than I'd ever anticipated before. I was playing music, I was doing this, I was, oh my goodness. And so my dad asked me, like, you know, what do you want to do as an adult? What do you want to do? And I was like, I want to be a musician, I want to be a writer, I want to be a diplomat, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a psychologist, I had like a list of 20 things. Dad's like, all right, that's cool. But just understand, none of it is going to happen like this. There's the inevitability of gradualness. You're going to have to move forward and all those things over time. But listen, it's also not a zero-sum game. It's kind of like what you learn in one discipline, you can apply to another one. So for example, I play a lot of music, as I mentioned, and I think playing improvisational music, jazz, blues, anything like that, it's not just feeling. You have to know the tempo. You have to know the chord structure. You have to know how to be able to listen to people, to get a sense of what's going on in the room. And then once all those things are sort of set up, you step up to the microphone and you tell your story. That doesn't take away from the work I do as a psychologist. That doesn't take away from tonight, because what I'm doing tonight is essentially jazz. I know the chord, I know what things I'm supposed to touch on. I'm trying to vibe with the audience and seeing where we are together. I know that I don't have 3 hours, I only have 1 hour, so I can't tell every story. I need to do this, but with all this context and what you've come here to hear about with my dad, all that's there, and now I can tell my story. It's not written down. It's not this, so what you learn in one thing helps you to really move forward in others. And it's a lesson I've carried with me for quite some time. And then he had the nerve to go ahead and write a poem about me. You know? Of course, if I could find it, where was it?
Last page, I think.
There we are. So he wrote this poem back in 1971. This is back when O.J. Simpson was still just a football player. Known for that. This is the first time. So this poem is called The Hawk. O.J. finds a hole in the line and moves knee-high, body erect, accelerating. The hawk watches. His eyes balloons, each a single brown polka dot. Hawk runs that way now. Through the grass, through the house, through childhood. Hawk hears the big boys talking tough, and he lowers his voice in salute. Tendrils of thunder. Funny, yet not funny. He kicks the puppy, but finds a daisy and brings it to his mother. An old woman asked him, "What will you be, son, when you grow up?" Hawk replied, "A man." Well, actually did say that. No depth to it. But what will you be when you grow up? A man, right? It made sense to me. But he heard that and thought, oh, that's profound. And again, from 6 years old, reading that, and what I was sort of telling you before about not being stuck trying to be the man. But what does it mean to actually be a man? In a very close sense. And the fact that it does take time. And it's really, again, about the effort. In the effort lies the art sort of thing. I think it's a similar sort of thing in terms of being an adult, being a woman, being a man. And here are, I was having trouble picking through all the different things, but different grandchildren. Not all of them are there. Here's Stephanie. There's my son Emery, my nephew Will, my nephew Josh, nephew Caleb. We haven't met. He lives in a different part of the country, and my dad was working so hard to try and do a portrait of my daughter Lilith before he passed, but it just got to the point where his hand was he just couldn't do it. He was literally putting it together so she doesn't have this. But sometimes just to understand, again, the battles that we fight, the things that we try to do, it's not just about us. It's not even just about our children, but their children and their children. That I think each one of us kind of stands at a crossroad for our particular families, and we put them on a different trajectory. And all of these people, this little guy right here, Emery, who just turned 21 when I was leaving to come here tonight, I mean, he burst into tears before I left. And he was just like, please, whatever you do, let the people know how much we appreciate our grandfather. None of this happens without him. None of this happens without him. To feel that sort of love, you know? So I talked about the anchor and the wings. And in terms of the wings, my dad was such an adventurer. I mean, he traveled the world. He was always trying new things. And I just threw a couple of these together, you know, even different styles of art. And we traveled to the West and doing this sort of almost geometric, you know, Griots sort of thing with the horses that are running. This is from a market in Algiers. And when he was living in visiting Tunisia with the Berber gentleman walking in Tunis. This is the Hotel Portofino in Spain. And this was a rabbi whose picture he had seen and was just so struck by the image and all that. But again, all faiths, all people, he really saw us all as being part of the same human family. Again, that human connection. And towards the end of his life, he was really supportive of me, my wings, beyond the work that I do, but in terms of music. And this one to the right he calls Tiger Rag. No tigers were harmed in the painting of this. Actually, I leaned up against our Doberman Pinscher. That's how we got the picture. And somehow, the magic of art, he transformed it into a tiger. And this one right here, you might recognize it from earlier. There was another painting of dancers, and he did many things. And again, you know, kind of an allusion to his parents on the floor. But my band, Casa Montequilla, was putting out our first CD, and he's like, you don't have to worry about art, I got you. So this is a wood carving, and he did the pen and ink and was just beginning to carve the wood. And again, this is probably about 2 months before he passed. And again, his hands got to the point where he couldn't finish. So this piece is unfinished, but to me, it's like the most beautiful piece. So, because he just never stopped trying to express, trying to share, trying to encourage. When I come towards the end, and as I wanted to end with where I sort of started, that in the effort lies the art. So what you were doing is so important for these young people that want to study art. It's amazing what a little bit of encouragement can do. If someone sees that someone else actually values what they're doing and sees where they can go. This particular painting is one he did the night his father died. And I remember after dinner, in the kind of mood, state he was in, and he wasn't angry, it was just, he just knew he needed to be somewhere, and the juices were flowing, and he needed to find a way to synthesize it and put it together. By the time I went to bed that night and came down and kissed him goodnight, he was done this painting. I always think about it, you know. Pop-Pop had come to dock. We're just waiting for the next iteration of someone who's going to take the boat out on the water again. Is it in dock for the winter? I don't know. But even in the low moments, always found a way to express. And I think that the last words for this formal part of the presentation, I hope that really we'll have some opportunity to ask some questions or talk. But the last word should be his. He wrote a poem for his father, and I could do no better. Hope I get through this one. To my father, I always raised my eyes to him, even when I grew taller than he is, especially when I grew taller than he. He is one of the few men who cast shadows when they walk. Sadly, most people haven't really been here at all. With those words, I just want to thank you for spending this time with us, and I hope you get a little more insight into this amazing, amazing person and denizen of Langhorne, who was William H. Smith Sr. Thank you.